A few years ago, I was facilitating a music therapy session with a school-age boy. Unfortunately, he was at the end of his disease process from an aggressive brain tumor and was nearing end of life. I was sitting on the floor with him in the living room with his massage therapist as well. We were co-treating. We were trying to facilitate little moments of comfort and childlike joy despite his disease process and decline. Suddenly, his father, who had been at the other corner of the room, not participating, walked over. He sat down with us, and he put his hand on his son, and he started to sing. Look into my eyes, you will see what you mean to me. I had a decision to make in that moment. It's a decision that music therapists make all of the time. How to amplify the meaning of that moment through music. I found the key that he was singing in. I picked up my guitar and I started to play with him as he sang through the entire song for his son. The mood in the room shifted to one of facilitating those little moments of joy and connection, to acknowledging the immense grief and the immense love during this moment and during this time in their lives. I'm telling you this story because it's an example of an intuitive decision that I made in the moment. An intuitive decision is one that you make quickly, and you're not really sure why you made it, but you just knew that it was the appropriate thing to do. If you've ever co-treated with a music therapist before, or perhaps you are a music therapist, you know that we are an evidence-based profession. However, our treatment modality is an art form. It's music. We rely heavily on intuitive decisions, just as we rely on evidence. Pictured, you see the effect of different sound frequencies on dishes of water. We know that science and art are always in relationship, but sometimes that's extremely difficult to articulate. A few years ago, my colleagues Aaron Fox and Noah Potvin and I became very interested in this idea that music therapists are always making intuitive decisions, particularly in matters of the heart, like addressing emotional expression or end-of-life care. We designed a grounded theory study, and we explored how music therapists assess the needs of their patients in the moment during end-of-life care, and how they then make subsequent clinical decisions. The result of that study is a theoretical model that I'm excited to share with you today. You can kind of think of it as a GPS for intuitive decision-making, except that you can travel forward in the model or you can travel backward. I imagine that there are not that many music therapists in the room today, maybe more than usual. But I would imagine that many of us in this room make intuitive decisions all the time. This model is a great way and a great tool to do reflective practice. Reflective practice is a structured process that involves healthcare professionals analyzing their experiences to improve their practice. Put simply, what did we do right? What could we have done better in the future? It is so important for healthcare workers to regularly engage in reflective practice. Firstly, because it does improve patient outcomes over time, but also it builds creativity, it builds self-awareness, and it builds confidence in our clinical decisions. This is the model, an epistemology of assessment and clinical decision-making, which basically means, how do you know what you know? So the big circle is you. And in the center, you see what we call ways of knowing, which is essentially your knowledge sources. And this may be different for everyone, but we identified 5 key ways of knowing in our study participants. The first is experiential, your life experiences, maybe clinical, maybe in your life personally. All of those experiences contribute to what you know. The second is unique to music therapists, but you might think of it as your very skill-specific way of knowing. For us, the musical instrument that we were trained in vastly affects the musical vocabulary that we have to use in a session. It also encompasses our clinical training. It also is the cultural moment of music that we grew up in. We are all products of that. Third is our personal way of knowing. And this is more about how you interact with information in the world. So this could be as simple as, are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you grieving? It can also be your religious background, perhaps your cultural background. When you're presented with information, how does it land with you personally? An ethical way of knowing is, of course, important in healthcare, and it's how we consider what is the best possible option, what will reduce harm in this scenario. Empirical knowledge is, of course, the gold standard in healthcare. That is evidence, right? We have a nice body of literature telling us that we are pretty sure this is the correct response. That would be research, literature, perhaps your theoretical orientation, and your academic training. As we move through a decision, we're now moving to the spectrum that you see that's vertical. And this is how we're accessing that knowledge. So we access knowledge anywhere on a spectrum from conscious to intuitive or sensory. So a conscious access of knowledge would be, okay, there's problem X, and I know that solution Y is appropriate. And I know that because of my academic training. I've seen 100 patients have it before, and the literature has a solid body of evidence suggesting this is the correct course of action. And if I asked you to justify why you made the decision that you did, you'd probably very quickly be able to tell me what I just told you. On the bottom of the spectrum, we have an intuitive decision, which is, it came to me. I did it, I know it was appropriate. But if I asked you to explain why you did that, you might have a lot of trouble explaining why. One of the participants in our study described a moment when she was providing music therapy for someone at end of life, and they were agitated and in need of comfort. She started to create music that sounded like a grounding heartbeat. And the word that she used to describe the music was maternal. And the patient was comforted and soothed by her music. When we asked her to describe why she made that clinical decision, she wasn't sure. It was an intuitive clinical decision. However, she was able to use this model to connect back to her ways of knowing. In her case, her personal identity as a mother, her academic training in music therapy that helped her create a maternal and grounding aesthetic with the appropriate instrumentation, and also her life experience as a caregiver for her own mother. All of this led to an intuitive decision that she made. In my case, when the boy's father started to sing, I noticed that he was singing in C-sharp major. When I picked up my guitar, I put a capo on the first fret and I played in C major position because it was going to be the quickest way to follow him musically, easily, and stay present. I also grew up in the 90s. I know that song, thank God. And I had a pretty good idea of the chord structure. I also remembered my academic training, which taught me that when human beings are suffering and they're struggling to create meaning in their suffering, music can be a beautiful scaffolding for that meaning making, even if just for 3.5 minutes during a song. And all of this came together in 1 second into an intuitive decision. I would imagine that in the near future, perhaps distant, everyone in this room is going to make a big intuitive decision. And when you do, I encourage you to use this model or something similar to engage in reflective practice, to travel backward and be curious about what got you to that intuitive decision. Because empiricism and intuition are not opposites. They just travel different paths to conscious awareness. And when those roads to that decision seem a little bit murky, I encourage you, explore them. Because what you're really doing is traveling the roads back to yourself. You're creating self-awareness, you're creating confidence, and eventually discernment in your own intuitive decisions as you make great clinical decisions in the moment every day. Thank you.